The buzzing of her alarm clock was the usual offender in ruining what few precious moments of sleep Elise managed to squeeze in. But today, something else jolted her awake. The sensation that something was off, something lurking at the edge of her consciousness, waiting to be discovered. Her hand slid across the nightstand in search of her phone, but instead, her fingers met the cool edge of a crisp, unfamiliar paper. She blinked against the morning light, adjusting to the bold lettering at the top of the document. Marriage certificate. Her name. A stranger's name. Her heart thudded so violently she could feel it in her throat. Matthew Ashford. It was a name that meant something, even to someone like her, who had no business keeping up with the lives of billionaires. He was on magazines, his face plastered across business articles, one of those men who had too much money and not enough reason to be on earth except to make more of it. And apparently, she was now legally married to him. Her first thought was that this had to be some sort of joke. A prank. Maybe Sloane, her best friend and occasional chaos agent, had decided that Elise's life wasn't dramatic enough. But no, Sloane had many faults, and orchestrating legal fraud wasn't one of them. She racked her brain for any recollection. Had she been drinking? No, she couldn't afford alcohol, let alone the kind of recklessness that led to drunken weddings. Had she been tricked? She felt fine. No dizziness. No hazy memories threatening to surface. Panic clawed up her chest as she yanked open her nightstand drawer and rummaged for her phone. The screen lit up, her notifications a collection of payment reminders, a missed call from her daughter's school, and an unread message from Sloane. Call me. What the hell did you do? That was enough to send Elise shooting out of bed, heart hammering. She threw on the first thing she could find, jeans and a wrinkled sweater that had survived one too many cycles in the laundromat's questionable machines. She shoved the marriage certificate into her bag, kissed Miranda on the forehead without waking her, and promised herself she would have this sorted out before her daughter was home from kindergarten. Ashford Enterprises was one of those buildings that seemed to belong in another dimension, one where people like her didn't exist. She stood in the lobby, gripping the strap of her bag, aware of how out of place she looked among the polished professionals who barely spared her a glance. The receptionist smiled, oblivious to the existential crisis Elise was having. Do you have an appointment? No, she said, but I think I have something better. His last name. The woman frowned, clearly unimpressed. Mr. Ashford is in meetings all morning. If you'd like to leave a message. Elise didn't have time for bureaucracy. She pulled out the marriage certificate, unfolded it, and slid it across the desk. The receptionist's expression barely flickered before she straightened her posture and pressed a discreet button under the desk. I see. One moment. Less than 3 minutes later, a man in an expensive suit appeared. He had the kind of air about him that suggested he was important but not as important as he wished he were. Ms. Merritt, he greeted, his voice carefully neutral. Mr. Ashford will see you now. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the distant sound of her pulse drumming in her ears. When the doors opened, she was led into an office that was somehow even more excessive than she'd expected. Floor-to-ceiling windows, leather furniture that probably cost more than her entire apartment, and behind a sleek desk sat Matthew Ashford. The man she had allegedly married. He looked up from his laptop, and for a moment, he just stared at her. No recognition flickered across his face, no sign of familiarity. He was just as confused as she was. She didn't waste time. She walked right up to his desk, pulled the certificate from her bag, and slammed it down in front of him. You want to explain this? Matthew didn't move. He glanced at the document, then back at her, his expression unreadable. Excuse me? She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. That's my line, don't you think? Because, according to this, I married you last night, and I can guarantee that wasn't on my to-do list. Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance, confusion, maybe even disbelief. He picked up the paper, scanned it, then leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. This isn't possible. Well, legally speaking, it is. He exhaled slowly, clearly trying to process. I don't remember this. Her stomach twisted. Yeah, well, neither do I. That got his full attention. His gaze snapped back to her, sharp and assessing. You don't remember anything? She crossed her arms, defiant. No. Do you? A pause. The tiniest shift in his expression. No. For some reason, that made her stomach drop even further. The man in the suit, one of his lawyers, she assumed, stepped forward. Sir, we need to verify. Do it, Matthew cut in, voice clipped. He turned to Elise, his jaw tight. This is a mistake. I don't know how this happened, but I assure you, I had no reason to marry a stranger last night. Elise bristled. Oh, believe me, I'm so reassured. Because getting married to a billionaire was exactly my 5-year plan. The lawyer cleared his throat. The marriage certificate is legitimate. Filed and processed last night. It's legally binding. Silence stretched between them. Matthew closed his eyes briefly, then let out a slow breath before looking at her again. I'll fix this. Great. Fix it now. It's not that simple. She knew that already, but hearing it aloud made her want to scream. Then make it simple. I have a daughter. I have bills. I can't afford to be in some absurd legal battle because you apparently had a very eventful night. His expression tightened at that, but he didn't snap back. Instead, he looked at the lawyer. Options? We can file for an annulment, but given the legal nature of the contract, it could take weeks, possibly months, to process. Elise groaned. I don't have months to be accidentally married to a billionaire. There has to be another way. Matthew was silent for a moment, then said, if we can figure out how this happened, we can undo it faster. She wanted to argue, but honestly? He was right. She huffed, crossing her arms. Fine. But I need to be clear, I don't want anything from you. I don't want money, I don't want press, I don't want whatever weird benefit people think comes from being attached to someone like you. I just want my life back. Something unreadable crossed his face. Noted, he said. Then, after a pause, and for the record, neither do I. For the first time since she walked into the building, Elise realized something. Neither of them wanted this. But someone did. Matthew sat at the head of the conference table, staring at the men and women who had made it their mission to dissect every personal and professional move he made. The board had always been ruthless, but today, they smelled blood in the water. The air conditioning hummed overhead, but the tension in the room made it feel suffocating. Colin Perry, the longest-serving member, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. A secret marriage, Matthew? Do you expect us to believe that this is normal behavior for a CEO entrusted with billions of dollars and thousands of employees? Matthew resisted the urge to pinch the bridge of his nose. He had already spent the morning dealing with his unwanted wife, and now this. No, I don't expect you to believe anything, he said evenly. Because I don't remember how it happened. Lena Lynn, the chief legal officer, narrowed her eyes. So you admit you don't even recall the circumstances under which you signed a legally binding document? That's exactly what I'm saying. There was a pause, then quiet murmurs. The words reckless and liability floated in the air, and Matthew knew exactly where this was headed. They had been waiting for something like this. For months, they had been challenging his leadership, whispering that he was too unpredictable, too willing to take risks. A stunt like this only fed their narrative. Wesley Grant, the board member who had been circling Matthew's position like a vulture, made a show of flipping through the marriage certificate that had been leaked to the press just hours earlier. I can only imagine how our investors feel, he said, shaking his head. $1 billion empire in the hands of a man who wakes up married to strangers. It's not exactly inspiring confidence. Matthew exhaled slowly. This is a personal matter. It has no bearing on my ability to run Ashford Enterprises. Oh, but it does, Wesley said, feigning disappointment. Your judgment is in question. If you can't even manage your own affairs, how can we trust you with ours? The murmurs grew louder. Matthew's grip on the arm of his chair tightened. He needed to contain this before it spiraled. I understand your concerns, he said. Which is why I'm handling the situation. Colin Perry raised a skeptical brow. And how exactly do you plan to do that? Matthew had no answer. At least, not yet. Elise was already halfway out of the building when she realized how ridiculous this entire thing was. She had planned to storm out, call a lawyer, and be done with it. But now, standing on the sidewalk, staring up at the towering glass walls of Ashford Enterprises, she had a sinking feeling that nothing about this was going to be simple. A high-profile billionaire didn't just get married overnight without the entire world knowing about it. Yet somehow, it had happened. And if it wasn't an accident, then someone had planned it. Which meant she wasn't just in the middle of a mistake, she was in the middle of something intentional. She pulled out her phone and called Sloan. The line barely rang before Sloan answered. Please tell me this is some kind of performance art piece you're working on. I wish, Elise muttered, pacing. I don't know what's happening, but I need to fix it. Fix it? Babe, you married Matthew Ashford. That's not a typo on a Starbucks cup. That's a scandal waiting to happen. Elise rubbed her temple. I don't care about the scandal. I just want my life back. Okay, but before you go setting things on fire, maybe consider that this isn't just about you anymore. What's that supposed to mean? Sloan sighed. You haven't checked the news yet, have you? Elise felt her stomach drop. She pulled up a browser, typed in his name, and there it was, Mystery Bride, Matthew Ashford's secret marriage stuns Wall Street. Her own face stared back at her from a blurry paparazzi photo, caught mid-step outside Ashford Enterprises. She felt lightheaded. How the hell did they get this so fast? They're the media, Sloan said. It's their job to ruin your day. Elise shut her eyes. This was worse than she thought. She marched back inside. Matthew was still in the boardroom when his assistant slipped in and whispered something in his ear. He barely had time to react before the door flew open and Elise walked in, looking like she had just finished reading her own obituary. The board members stared. Matthew sighed. Now is not a good time. No, I think now is the perfect time, she shot back, throwing her phone onto the table. The headline was still glaring at them from the screen. Care to explain how I became a public figure in less than an hour? Wesley Grant smirked. Ah, the wife arrives. Matthew ignored him. This isn't the place for this discussion. Really? Because it seems like everyone else here gets to have an opinion about my life. He clenched his jaw. He could argue, or he could fix this. We'll talk in my office. Elise folded her arms. Good. Because I'm not leaving until we do. The moment they were alone, she let loose. I was willing to be reasonable about this, she said, pacing his office. I was willing to let you handle it and stay out of your way. But now, my face is all over the internet. My daughter's name is out there. I can't have reporters digging into my life. Matthew sat on the edge of his desk, watching her. I didn't leak this. No, but someone did. And now we have a problem. He ran a hand through his hair. I know. Great. So fix it. He hesitated, then said, I have a solution. She crossed her arms. I'm listening. We stay married. She blinked. That's not a solution. That's a worse problem. It's the only way to control the narrative. He pushed off the desk and faced her directly. The board already thinks I'm a liability. If we announce a split right now, it gives them an excuse to push me out. But if we stay married, at least temporarily, we can control how this plays out. Elise let out a laugh, short and sharp. You want me to play house with you for corporate optics? I want both of us to get out of this with minimal damage. She stared at him. And what exactly do I get out of this? He exhaled. I know you have financial struggles. I know your daughter needs medical care. I'll make sure you have stability. You won't have to worry about bills for the next 6 months. She hated that her brain immediately started doing the math. 6 months of financial security. 6 months where she wouldn't have to work 2 jobs, constantly worry about Miranda's doctor visits, or choose between rent and groceries. But there was one thing she needed to be absolutely sure of. And after 6 months? You don't suddenly decide you like having a wife and refuse to let me go? His expression didn't change. You'll be free to walk away. She hated this. She hated that it made sense. But most of all, she hated that she couldn't afford to say no. She lifted her chin. I have conditions. He nodded. Name them. I keep my job. My life stays mine. You don't get to parade me around like some trophy wife, and I don't have to pretend I adore you. Fine. And Miranda is off limits to the press. If they so much as try to photograph her, we're done. He met her gaze. Agreed. She took a breath. Then I guess I'm your wife. For 6 months. He extended his hand. She didn't want to shake it. But she did. Neither of them smiled. Matthew stared at the laptop screen, expression unreadable, as the grainy hotel security footage played before him. Elise sat stiffly across from him in his office, her arms crossed, eyes glued to the screen like she was waiting for it to offer an explanation. The footage was silent, but it didn't need sound to be completely surreal. There they were, him and Elise, sitting at the bar of the St. Regis Hotel. She was wearing a dark green dress that he had no recollection of ever seeing. He was in his usual black suit, looking exactly like himself, except he didn't feel like himself because the man in that video was marrying a stranger. His assistant, Gavin, hovered awkwardly near the desk, hands in his pockets. That's from last night, he said. Timestamp puts it around 10:47 p.m. Elise exhaled through her nose. I don't even stay up that late. Matthew barely heard her. He was focused on their faces in the video. They weren't laughing or flirting or behaving like two people caught up in some reckless whirlwind romance. They were serious. Intense. Talking like something important was on the line. A third person appeared in the footage, a man in a gray suit, sliding a folder across the bar. Gavin tapped the screen. That's when you were given some sort of paperwork. Elise leaned forward, narrowing her eyes. Who is that? I'm working on it, Gavin said. No clear facial match yet, but I'll have an ID soon. On screen, Matthew picked up the papers, flipping through them, his face set in concentration. Elise watched him, arms folded, lips pressed into a firm line. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't casual. Then, she reached into her purse, pulled out a pen, and signed. Matthew followed. Elise let out a hollow laugh, sinking back into her chair. Well. At least we know we weren't forced at gunpoint. The footage continued. Matthew gestured for drinks. The bartender placed 2 glasses of champagne in front of them. They lifted their glasses, tapped them together in a toast, and drank. Then, the video ended. Silence filled the room. Matthew closed the laptop with deliberate care. I don't remember any of that. Neither do I, Elise said. Gavin cleared his throat. There's no footage of what happened after. You both left the bar together, but there's no record of the actual wedding. Elise stared at him. You're telling me that in a 5-star hotel with security cameras in every corner, no one caught us at a wedding chapel? Matthew frowned. That doesn't make sense. It doesn't make any sense, Elise snapped. I wasn't blackout drunk. I woke up in my own bed, completely fine. I didn't feel hungover, I didn't feel drugged, and yet somehow I managed to legally bind myself to a billionaire overnight? Gavin shifted uncomfortably. I checked the wedding license details. It was officiated by a real minister, licensed, verified, completely above board. Whoever set this up, they covered all legal bases. Matthew leaned back in his chair, processing. His head ached from not knowing what the hell happened. Run the man's image through facial recognition. If he's the one who gave us those documents, I want to know who he is. Gavin nodded and stepped out. Elise tapped her fingers against her knee. So, let's say we signed something binding. What kind of contract could possibly require a marriage? Matthew had been asking himself the same thing. There were a dozen possible business-related reasons someone might try to push him into an agreement. Mergers. Buyouts. Power plays. But none of them required a legal spouse. Elise stood abruptly. I need air. Matthew watched as she marched to the window, pressing her palms against the glass, looking down at the city below like it might have answers. She turned back around. Okay, tell me this. If you don't remember anything, and I don't remember anything, how do we even know we were in our right minds when we signed that? Matthew considered the footage again. The two of them had looked too serious. Too aware. But if that were true, then why couldn't they remember? I don't know, he admitted. But someone wanted this to happen. Elise blew out a breath, shaking her head. This is insane. Matthew couldn't argue. She sat back down, hands gripping the armrests of the chair. You're sure there's no way to get out of this? If we fight it legally, we'll be tied up in court for months. Annulments don't work when there's a paper trail proving intent. She groaned. Amazing. So I'm just stuck with you. He exhaled slowly. For now. Gavin returned, looking a little too eager. Got something? Matthew sat up. The man from the video? Gavin handed him a file. His name is Noel Holloway. Corporate lawyer. Specializes in contract mediation and high-profile deals. Not directly tied to Ashford Enterprises, but he's worked with some of your competitors. Matthew flipped through the pages, scanning Holloway's history. Something about it felt off. Elise frowned. Why would some random corporate lawyer approach us in a hotel and make us sign something? Gavin hesitated. That's where it gets weird. Holloway left the country this morning. Matthew's gaze snapped up. What? Flight to Geneva. No return ticket. Elisa's fingers curled against the table. That's not suspicious at all. Matthew looked at Gavin. Find out if he has any ties to Wesley Grant. Gavin nodded and stepped out again. Elise muttered something under her breath. Matthew arched a brow. What? She let out a frustrated laugh. I was supposed to spend today applying for a higher-paying job. Instead, I'm here, unraveling a conspiracy about my own wedding. Something about the way she said it made Matthew really look at her. Not just as the stranger he'd been forced into a marriage with, but as someone who had a life before this. She wasn't after his money. She wasn't leveraging this situation for personal gain. She was just as blindsided as he was. For some reason, that made it worse. He reached for his phone and dialed another number. Elise watched him. "What are you doing?" "Calling a private investigator." She scoffed. "Oh good, nothing says healthy marriage like hiring someone to find out why it happened in the first place." Matthew ignored her sarcasm. "If someone orchestrated this, we need to know why." She sighed and rubbed her temples. "Fine. But if I find out this was your idea and you just conveniently forgot, I'm burning your penthouse down." Matthew almost smirked. "Duly noted." Elise sat back. "So, what now?" Matthew looked at the closed laptop, the evidence they'd just seen. "We wait," he said. "And we find out who wanted this marriage to happen more than we did." The key to surviving a completely insane situation, Elise decided, was to treat it like a temporary illness. An unfortunate but ultimately manageable condition. Like the flu. Or jury duty. Or, apparently, accidentally marrying a billionaire and being forced to live in his penthouse. She stood in the center of Matthew Ashford's living room, though living room felt like the wrong word. It was too vast, too gleaming, too full of furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the skyline like a postcard, and somewhere in the distance, a pianist was playing live music from another high-rise, as if the entire city conspired to remind her she didn't belong here. She turned to Matthew, who stood by the entrance, watching her reaction like she was an experiment he was conducting. "You live here alone?" "Yes." "No secret family in the East Wing? No butler named Alfred who's going to offer me a mysterious key?" His lips twitched. "Just me." She exhaled, pressing her fingertips to her temples. "This is not my life." "It is for 6 months," he said, like it was a contract term and not her personal nightmare. Miranda, oblivious to her mother's existential crisis, took one look at the enormous sectional couch and launched herself onto it, burying her face in one of the throw pillows. "Mom, we should stay forever," she mumbled into the expensive fabric. Elise shot Matthew a look. "You see what you've done? You've ruined her standards." Matthew didn't seem concerned. "She'll be comfortable." Elise wanted to argue, but she was too tired. The past 48 hours had been a relentless cycle of confusion, legal paperwork, and very little sleep. If she had any hope of getting through this, she needed clarity. And clarity meant figuring out how the hell this marriage happened in the first place. Matthew walked to the bar and poured himself a drink. "You're planning something." Elise crossed her arms. "Yes. I'm going back to the hotel." He raised a brow. "Why?" "Because someone there knows something. And I'm not just going to sit around playing house when I could be getting answers." He considered her for a moment, then set down his glass. "I'll come with you." She scoffed. "Of course you will." The hotel smelled like wealth, like fresh-cut orchids, expensive perfume, and the kind of champagne people ordered without looking at the price. Elise wasn't easily intimidated, but walking into the St. Regis in her worn-out boots made her want to shrink. Matthew, of course, looked completely at home. They approached the bar, where a man in his 50s polished a glass with the precision of someone who had been doing it for decades. Matthew nodded. "We're looking for information about last night." The bartender's eyes flicked between them, and something in his face shifted. Recognition. Elise leaned forward. "You remember us?" He sighed, setting the glass down. "Hard to forget." She exchanged a glance with Matthew. "What do you mean?" The bartender folded his arms. "You two weren't exactly subtle. You were having some kind of intense conversation. Looked serious." Elise hesitated. "Serious how?" The man rubbed his jaw. "She was upset," he said, nodding at Elise. "Really upset." And you, he turned to Matthew. You looked mad enough to throw a chair. Elisa's stomach twisted. We were arguing. Not shouting, but yeah. Something was definitely wrong. Matthew's jaw tightened. Did you hear what we were talking about? The bartender shook his head. I don't listen in on private conversations. But you both signed some papers, had a drink, and then left together. Elise glanced at Matthew. What kind of people argue, sign legal documents, and then celebrate with champagne? He exhaled slowly. People making a deal. She turned back to the bartender. Was there anyone else with us? A man in a gray suit? He frowned, thinking. Yeah. He was there earlier. Seemed like the one giving you the papers. But after that, it was just you two. Elise felt like she had been dropped into someone else's life. None of this fit together. None of this made sense. Matthew slipped $100 bill onto the counter. If you remember anything else, let me know. The bartender nodded, slipping the bill into his pocket. Elise turned to Matthew. Okay. What now? He glanced toward the hotel lobby. Now, we find out what kind of contract we signed. And why. Matthew woke in a cold sweat, the echo of a memory slipping through his grasp like water through his fingers. He sat up, rubbing his temple, willing his mind to hold onto it before it vanished completely. Elise. He had seen her, her face, her tears, the unmistakable frustration in her voice. And himself, standing across from her, saying words that felt foreign and yet entirely his own. This is the only way to fix it. He squeezed his eyes shut, trying to force more details to the surface. What had needed fixing? Why had she looked at him like that, not like a stranger, but like someone who was desperately counting on him? The memory had come out of nowhere, hitting him mid-dream and yanking him awake like a car skidding on ice. He threw back the covers, rolling his shoulders, trying to shake the unease that clung to him. This wasn't just a mistake. Something had led to that moment, to that contract. And he was going to find out what. He stepped into the hallway, where the scent of coffee drifted through the penthouse. He followed it, finding Elise in the kitchen, standing in front of his state-of-the-art espresso machine like it was a foreign artifact. Let me guess, she said without looking up. You have no idea how to use this thing either. Not a clue, he admitted, crossing his arms as he leaned against the counter. She sighed and pressed random buttons. The machine hissed in protest. Matthew watched her, the ghost of his dreams still fresh in his mind. He didn't tell her about it. Not yet. Instead, he said, "Did you sleep?" Elise scoffed. Like a baby. If babies wake up every 3 hours wondering how they ended up legally bound to a man they barely know. A reluctant smirk pulled at his lips. I'll take that as a no. She finally gave up on the machine and turned to face him. Let's just get this out of the way. I don't like being here, and I don't trust whatever arrangement led to this. But for Miranda's sake, I'll deal with it. Something about the way she said it made his chest tighten. She wasn't playing a role. She wasn't trying to manipulate the situation. She was doing this for her daughter. And somehow, that made him feel even worse about the fact that he had no idea what had truly happened between them. Miranda padded into the kitchen then, rubbing her eyes and yawning. She climbed onto one of the bar stools and blinked at them both. Are we fighting? Elise sighed, running a hand over her daughter's messy curls. No, sweetie. Just having a very boring adult conversation. Miranda nodded sleepily. Okay. Can I have pancakes? Matthew straightened. I can make pancakes. Elise shot him a skeptical look. You? The man who just admitted he can't operate his own coffee machine. He grinned. I have hidden talents. She watched as he pulled out ingredients, moving through the kitchen with practiced ease. She wasn't sure what was more surprising, the fact that he knew how to cook or the way Miranda was watching him, fascinated. Matthew flipped a pancake with effortless precision. "I used to make breakfast for my younger sister when we were kids," he said, as if reading Elise's thoughts. Miranda gasped. "You have a sister?" His expression softened. "Had." Elise stilled, her fingers tightening around her mug. Miranda, in the blissful ignorance of childhood, simply asked, "Was she nice?" Matthew nodded, a small smile playing at his lips. "She was the nicest person I knew." Elise's throat felt tight. She didn't ask what had happened. She could see it in his face. Miranda beamed. "I think you make good pancakes." He set a plate in front of her. "That's the highest praise I've ever received." Elise watched them, something shifting inside her. She had spent so much time thinking of him as the enemy, the cold, calculated businessman who had somehow trapped her in this impossible situation. But here, in the soft glow of morning light, flipping pancakes for a 5-year-old, he was just a man. And that scared her more than anything. Later that day, while Matthew was in a meeting, Elise sat on the couch, her laptop open as she tried to look up anything she could about the past week. She scrolled through news articles, trying to find something, anything, that might explain how they had ended up at that hotel, signing that contract. Her head ached from staring at the screen, and just as she was about to give up, a new memory flickered. It was quick. A flash of a hotel room. A contract in her hands. Her own voice, unsteady, saying, "Are you sure about this?" She jolted back to reality, breath unsteady. It wasn't much. But it was something. She needed to talk to Matthew. But when she found him, standing by the window, deep in thought, she hesitated. Because for the first time since this whole mess started, she wasn't sure if she wanted to remember. The thick stack of papers lay on Matthew's desk like a bomb waiting to go off. He flipped through them, his lawyer sitting across from him, watching carefully. He had expected some kind of loophole, a glaring mistake that would explain how he had ended up married to a woman he barely knew. Maybe a clerical error, a legal misstep, something that would make this whole thing disappear with a signature. But there was no mistake. "Everything is in order," his lawyer, Miles Thatcher, said, adjusting his glasses. "Both parties signed voluntarily. The marriage is legally binding." Elise sat stiffly in the chair across from him, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the papers like they might suddenly rearrange themselves into something reasonable. Matthew leaned back, staring at the words as if they might reveal something he had missed. But there it was, plain as day. His signature. Her signature. No evidence of coercion, no loophole. He looked up at Thatcher. "There's no way this was forced." Thatcher shook his head. "No. You both signed in full awareness of what you were agreeing to. The officiant was licensed. The contract is airtight." Matthew exhaled slowly, his fingers tightening around the edge of the document. He had no memory of putting his name on this paper. No recollection of standing beside Elise and agreeing to be her husband. But apparently, he had done exactly that. Elise let out a dry laugh. "Great. Fantastic. Love that for us." Matthew ignored her and turned back to Thatcher. "What else?" His lawyer hesitated. "There's a section on page 12 that stands out." Matthew flipped to it, his eyes scanning the words. His stomach tightened. It wasn't just a marriage contract. It was a business deal. The wording was frustratingly vague, but the document referenced a financial arrangement between the two of them. It wasn't a prenup. It wasn't an inheritance clause. It was something else entirely. He frowned. This wasn't just a marriage. This was a transaction. Elise sat up straighter. What does that mean? Thatcher adjusted his tie. It means your marriage was tied to some kind of business agreement. Unfortunately, the details in this contract are vague. There's mention of a financial incentive, but it doesn't specify for whom or under what conditions. Elise frowned, confused. I don't understand. Are you saying one of us got paid for this? Matthew barely heard her. His mind was racing, scanning through possible scenarios. A hostile takeover? A merger? A business deal that required him to be married? None of it made sense. He looked back at Thatcher. Who drafted this? Thatcher flipped through his notes. A firm called Bessing and Associates. Independent. Not connected to Ashford Enterprises. Matthew's stomach tightened. He recognized the name. Thatcher continued, they're known for handling high-stakes, confidential agreements. The kind that don't leave paper trails beyond what's necessary. Elise scoffed. Wonderful. So not only did I marry a stranger, but I also did it in the most suspicious way possible. Matthew's eyes were still glued to the contract. His signature was there, right next to hers, bold and unquestionable. His jaw tightened as his gaze flicked back to the clause that suggested financial compensation. He finally looked up at Elise, his voice cool and measured. Did you need money that badly? She blinked, stunned. Then, her face hardened into something sharp and furious. Excuse me? He held up the contract. There's a financial clause in here. You don't remember signing it, but you agreed to something. Her hands curled into fists. So your first thought is that I married you for money? What else am I supposed to think? Oh, I don't know, she snapped. Maybe that someone set us up. Maybe that this whole thing is bigger than just me looking for a payday. His temper flared. Then explain why the hell this contract exists. Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like you had something to gain. She shot up from her chair so abruptly that it scraped against the floor. I don't know why I signed that contract, but I know it wasn't for money. She grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. Matthew didn't stop her. Because the worst part? He wasn't sure if he believed her. Elise sat cross-legged on the couch, her laptop balanced on her thighs, the glow from the screen illuminating her face in the dim penthouse. The silence felt unnatural, thick with the weight of too many unanswered questions. She told herself she was just killing time, aimlessly clicking through emails, but that wasn't true. Ever since Matthew's lawyer had confirmed their marriage contract was tied to a business deal, she hadn't been able to shake the feeling that she was missing something important. Her inbox was full of the usual chaos, overdue bills, a reminder from Miranda's school about an upcoming fundraiser, an email from a temp agency she had applied to weeks ago. And then she saw it. A drafted email, sitting unsent in her outbox. She frowned. She didn't remember writing it. Her fingers hovered over the mousepad before she finally clicked. The subject line was blank, but the message. Matthew, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing by getting involved in this, but I can't just ignore it. Someone is trying to set you up. I have proof of something illegal happening inside your company. I don't know how deep it goes, but you need to be careful. Meet me at the St. Regis bar at 10. We need to talk before it's too late. Her heart slammed against her ribs. She read the words once. Twice. 3 times. This was her email. She had written this. But she had no memory of it. A sharp pang of fear curled in her stomach. She had gone to the hotel to warn Matthew. She had known something dangerous. Her breathing quickened. If she had been trying to protect him, then why couldn't she remember what the threat was? Her hands were shaking as she slammed the laptop shut and pushed off the couch. She found Matthew in his office, standing by the window, phone pressed to his ear. He was speaking in low, clipped tones, pacing slightly as he listened to whoever was on the other end. He looked like someone used to being in control, even when the ground was shifting beneath him. She didn't care. Without hesitation, she marched in and shoved the laptop onto his desk. "Read it." Matthew's brows furrowed at her tone, but he set his phone down without a word, turning the screen toward him. The moment his eyes landed on the message, his entire body went still. He read it once. Then again. And then, very slowly, he sat down. The silence between them was unbearable. "Do you remember this?" she asked, voice tight. He didn't answer right away. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, like touching the words might help bring the memory back. Finally, he spoke. "Yes." Elisa's breath hitched. He remembered. She swallowed hard. "What do you remember?" Matthew exhaled, dragging a hand down his face. "I remember you sitting across from me at the bar. You were nervous. You kept looking over your shoulder, like you thought someone was watching you." Her skin prickled. "Was someone?" His jaw tensed. "I don't know. But I remember what you said to me." He looked up at her, his blue eyes dark with something she couldn't quite place. "You told me that someone inside Ashford Enterprises was involved in something illegal. And that if I didn't act fast, it would destroy everything." Elisa's stomach twisted. "What was it?" Matthew shook his head. "I don't know. That's where it gets blurry. But I remember you telling me that you had proof." A chill ran down her spine. "Where is it?" Matthew's fists clenched. "That's the problem." She took a step closer, gripping the edge of his desk. "What do you mean?" "I mean that whatever proof you had is gone." Something inside her cracked open, a deep, gnawing fear she hadn't been able to name until now. Someone had erased their memories of that night. Someone had made sure the evidence disappeared. And that someone was still out there. Watching. Waiting. Elise shook her head, trying to make sense of it. "So let me get this straight. I had information, real, dangerous information, and I went to warn you. And somehow, between that moment and now, we got married, forgot everything, and whatever evidence I had is just missing?" Matthew's jaw was tight, his gaze locked onto hers. "Yes." She ran a hand through her hair, frustrated. "This isn't just a misunderstanding. Someone did this to us on purpose." Matthew nodded once, slow and deliberate. "And we need to find out who." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling exposed. What if they know we're figuring it out? What if they try to? Matthew stood, his presence commanding even in the dim light of the office. "I won't let anything happen to you or Miranda." The words were spoken with such certainty that for a moment, she almost believed him. She exhaled, nodding. "Then we start now." Matthew looked at her, something unreadable in his gaze. "Yes," he said. "We do." Matthew stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the glittering city below. The revelation from Elisa's email had shaken something loose in his mind, fragments of memories surfacing like pieces of a puzzle finally clicking together. The problem was, he still didn't have the whole picture. Behind him, Elise paced the living room, arms wrapped around herself. "So let's go over this again," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "Your company was about to be taken over, and somehow that led to this?" She gestured between them. "I don't see the connection." Matthew turned to face her. "Because you're missing the part where I had no other choice." She gave him a skeptical look. "Really? No other choice besides marrying a woman you'd never met?" His jaw clenched. It wasn't that simple. He walked to his desk and opened a file, pulling out a stack of documents. He flipped through them before settling on one and handing it to her. "This is what we were dealing with," he said. "Grant Holdings. Wesley Grant has been trying to get control of Ashford Enterprises for years. Last week, he found a loophole." Elise skimmed the document. "A loophole?" Matthew nodded. "There's a clause in our shareholder agreement, one that's been there since my grandfather founded the company. If the CEO is deemed unstable or unfit to lead, the board can vote to bring in an outside investor to take control." Elise frowned. "And let me guess, Wesley set you up to look unfit?" Matthew exhaled sharply. "The night we got married, I had just found out that Wesley had bribed key board members. He had everything lined up. The vote was supposed to happen the next morning." Elise sat down heavily on the couch, rubbing her temples. "So how does our marriage stop that?" Matthew hesitated. "Because there's another clause. One that overrides everything." He pulled another document from the stack and handed it to her. Elise skimmed it, her brow furrowing. "In the event of the CEO entering a significant and binding legal partnership," she paused. "Wait. This says marriage." Matthew nodded. "If I got married, the board couldn't make any major changes to company leadership for at least 6 months. It was meant to protect family-run companies from hostile takeovers." Elisa's stomach dropped. "So she swallowed. "You got married to stall the deal." He met her gaze. "We got married to stop Wesley." She let out a hollow laugh, shaking her head. "And here I thought this was just some elaborate drunk mistake." Matthew's mouth tightened. "No. It was calculated." She ran a hand through her hair. "Okay. Let's say I buy that. Let's say I walked into that hotel bar already knowing you were in trouble. Why would I agree to something this insane?" Matthew exhaled. "Because you had something to lose, too." The weight of those words settled between them. Elise shook her head. "I still don't remember." He studied her carefully. "But you knew something. You had proof of Wesley's corruption. And you were scared." She looked away. "I don't like that version of myself, the one who was scared." Matthew's voice softened. "Being scared doesn't mean you were wrong." She clenched her jaw. "Fine. Let's say I agreed. Let's say we both walked into that marriage knowing exactly what we were doing." Her eyes met his. "Why the hell don't we remember it?" That was the question that had been gnawing at him since the memories started surfacing. Someone had wanted them to forget. And that meant someone else had been involved. "The third person," Matthew said, more to himself than to her. Elisa's arms tightened around herself. "The man in the gray suit. The one from the hotel footage." Matthew nodded. "He's the missing piece." They sat in silence, the weight of everything settling in. Elise sighed. "So, to recap, your company was about to be taken over, I somehow got involved, and instead of running for the hills like any normal person, I agreed to marry you to stop it." Matthew smirked slightly. "Apparently." She groaned. "I need a drink." Matthew exhaled, rubbing his temple. "We need to find that man. Because whoever he is, he knows exactly why we're here." The office was too quiet. Matthew sat at his desk, hands steepled, staring at the file in front of him as if willing it to change. Across from him, Elise paced in tight circles, muttering under her breath. "He wasn't just some random lawyer," she said, running a hand through her hair. "He orchestrated all of this." Matthew nodded, still looking at the documents. "Noel Bessing," he said finally. "He's been working with Wesley Grant for years." Elise stopped pacing. "So Wesley did set us up." "Yes and no," Matthew said. "Wesley was planning a takeover, but Bessing saw an opportunity. Instead of just letting Wesley get control of Ashford Enterprises, he wanted to leverage us. She folded her arms. Us? Why? Matthew exhaled, pushing the file toward her. Bessing specializes in crisis contracts. He knew my company had a loophole that could be used against me, but he also knew that if I made a legally binding move first, I could block Wesley before he ever had the chance. Elise picked up the file, scanning it. So he needed you to get married to stop the takeover. Matthew nodded. And he needed you because you had the evidence. Her stomach twisted. I don't even remember what the evidence was. That's because Bessing made sure you wouldn't. Matthew reached into the file and pulled out a confidentiality waiver, one she didn't recognize but had signed anyway. She let out a bitter laugh. You're telling me I legally agreed to forget? Not exactly, Matthew said. But it looks like Bessing pushed a rushed contract through, one that classified whatever information you had as protected under legal privilege. The second you signed it, you were bound to confidentiality. Elise sat heavily in the chair across from him. And then we conveniently forgot everything else that happened that night. Matthew's fingers tightened around the edge of his desk. Bessing made sure that we'd go along with his plan, but I doubt even he expected us to lose our memories completely. Her mind raced. So Bessing set this up to help you, but also to help himself. He knew that if this worked, he'd be the man who saved Ashford Enterprises. That kind of reputation is worth millions in corporate law. Elise tapped the file. And now? Matthew leaned back, rubbing his temple. Now that we know the truth, we have to decide what to do with it. She exhaled. How does your legal team say we can fix this? Matthew grabbed another folder. We have options, but none of them are great. He flipped the pages, scanning them quickly. Option 1, we file for annulment now and go public with the truth. That means admitting we only got married to stop a hostile takeover, which will put the company at risk all over again. Elise grimaced. Not ideal. No, he agreed. Option 2, we legally separate, but we don't annul the marriage right away. We wait out the 6-month clause in the company bylaws, then dissolve it quietly. She frowned. That means pretending to stay married. Matthew met her eyes. Yes. Elise's stomach twisted. For weeks, she had been looking for a way out of this. A way to undo the mess, reclaim her life, and forget Matthew Ashford altogether. But now, faced with the choice, she hesitated. This wasn't just about business anymore. And that terrified her. What's the best move? She asked, her voice quieter than before. Matthew hesitated. If we stay married, we protect the company, avoid scandal, and keep Wesley from ever trying this again. She swallowed. But it also means making this real for a little longer. The words hung between them. Elise's pulse raced. She had spent every moment since waking up with that marriage certificate telling herself this was temporary. A problem to be solved, not a real relationship. But it had stopped feeling like a mistake weeks ago. She watched Matthew, waiting for him to say it. To make the decision. But instead, he looked at her. And waited. Because this time, she had to choose. Elise let out a shaky breath. And if I say no? If I walk away right now? Matthew's gaze didn't waver. Then I'll figure something else out. Her stomach tightened at how easily he said it. She didn't doubt him. He would find a way. He was Matthew Ashford. He had built his company into an empire, outmaneuvered competitors, thrived in a world designed to swallow people whole. He didn't need her. Matthew sat at his desk, the annulment papers in front of him, his hand resting on the top page but not moving. It was done. Simple, clean, efficient, just how he handled everything in his life. He had told his lawyer to draft them first thing that morning. Elise had been avoiding him since their conversation the night before, and he knew what that meant. She planned to leave. And if that was what she wanted, he wouldn't stand in her way. So why the hell hadn't he signed them yet? The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but he didn't move. His office door swung open before he could talk himself into picking up the pen. Elise stepped inside, her expression unreadable, her fingers curled into the sleeves of her sweater like she was holding herself together. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Matthew exhaled. "It's ready." Elise's eyes flickered to the papers. He cleared his throat. "I thought we should do this properly. No drama. No drawn-out court fights. Just." He stopped himself. Because she looked upset. Not relieved. Not triumphant. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but she hesitated. Matthew tapped the pen against the paper, forcing his voice to stay steady. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Elise swallowed. "Is it what you want?" The question caught him off guard. He could lie. He could say yes and make this easier for both of them. He could sign the damn papers and let her walk away. But somewhere along the way, this marriage had stopped being a mistake to fix and started feeling like something he didn't want to lose. His fingers curled into fists against the desk. "What do you want me to say, Elise?" Her eyes locked onto his. "I don't know. Maybe the truth." The truth? The truth was, he woke up every morning and looked for her before he even realized he was doing it. The truth was, Miranda had climbed onto his lap the night before and told him he made better pancakes than her mom, and for the first time in years, he had laughed so hard his ribs ached. The truth was, he had spent his entire life believing love made people weak. That needing someone was the same as giving them a weapon to hurt you. And then Elise had crashed into his life with her stubbornness and her fire and her refusal to be impressed by him, and suddenly, every assumption he had ever made felt like absolute garbage. So, no. He didn't want to sign the annulment. But he also wasn't going to ask her to stay if she didn't want to. He picked up the pen and held it over the paper. "I'll sign," he said quietly. "If you tell me to." Elise's breath caught. She had come here thinking she would find closure. That she would take the papers, say thank you, and leave. But she couldn't make herself move. Because the idea of leaving felt so much worse than the idea of staying. She had spent years being practical. Making safe choices. Never depending on anyone. And then Matthew had come into her life and blown every wall she had ever built to pieces. And now, when she finally had a way out, she wasn't sure she wanted it. Matthew was still waiting for her answer. Elise was torn. She planned to leave, but now, she didn't want to. He was still holding the pen, waiting for her answer. Miranda swung her legs back and forth as she sat on the couch, her small hands gripping the edge of the cushion. Elise had told her they would be leaving soon, that everything would go back to how it was before. But Miranda didn't want things to go back. She liked it here. She liked the big windows that let in all the sunshine, the way breakfast always smelled like pancakes, the way Matthew listened when she talked. She liked Matthew. And the thought of leaving made her stomach hurt. She watched as he stood near the window, speaking in a low voice to someone on the phone. He looked serious. He always looked serious, but there was something different about him today. His shoulders were tense, his expression unreadable. When he hung up, he turned, noticing her watching him. She hesitated for only a second before blurting out, "Will you still come visit me?" Matthew blinked, like he hadn't expected the question. "What?" "When we leave," Miranda said softly. "Will you still come see me?" The question hit him harder than he expected. Elise, who had been packing a bag in the corner of the room, stilled, her hands frozen on the zipper. Matthew glanced at her, then back at Miranda. His throat tightened. He wasn't the kind of man who second-guessed himself. He made decisions, acted on them, and moved forward. But when it came to Elise and Miranda, second-guessing was all he had been doing. He walked over to where Miranda sat, kneeling so they were at eye level. "Is that what you want?" Miranda nodded solemnly. "You make the best pancakes," she said, as if that alone was reason enough to stay in her life forever. Matthew swallowed. He wasn't sure what to say. Miranda frowned. "So, will you visit?" Matthew exhaled. "I guess I have a problem," he murmured. Miranda tilted her head. "What problem?" He turned back toward Elise. "Your mom's trying to leave me." Miranda gasped, spinning toward Elise in horror. "Mom! You can't leave Matthew." Elise pressed her lips together, torn between laughter and something much deeper. "Miranda." But Matthew stood, turning to face her fully. "Actually," he said, voice steady, "she can." The room fell silent. "She can leave," Matthew continued, his eyes locked onto Elise's. "She can take the papers, sign them, and go." Miranda shook her head furiously, but Matthew wasn't looking at her anymore. He was only looking at Elise. "But that's not what I want," he said. Elise's breath caught. "I don't want an annulment," Matthew said. "I don't want to undo this." Her heart was pounding. "Matthew. I want to do it again," he said, softer this time. Her brows furrowed. "What?" Matthew reached into his pocket, pulling out a small, velvet box. Elise's breath hitched. "I want to do it right," he said. "No contracts. No business deals. No secrets. Just you and me." Miranda clapped her hands. "Are you proposing?" Matthew smiled slightly. "I am." Elise stared at him, unable to move, unable to think. She had spent weeks trying to find a way out of this marriage. And now, when she finally had one, she realized, she didn't want it. She wanted this. She wanted him. Matthew opened the box, revealing a simple, elegant ring. "Elise," he said, "will you marry me?" Her chest ached. She could walk away. She could go back to the life she had before. Or she could choose this. Him. Miranda grabbed her sleeve. "Say yes, Mom." Elise swallowed hard, looking at the man in front of her. The one who had fought her at every turn, challenged her, frustrated her, and made her feel safer than she had in a long, long time. "Yes," she whispered. Matthew's smile was slow, real. Miranda shrieked. "Yay!" Matthew slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms. And this time, when they kissed, it wasn't for the sake of a contract. It was for them. Because they wanted this. And that made all the difference.